Well, welcome to our podcast where we explore faith in Jesus intersects with real life. So this month, we're going to look at the complexities of relationship through the lens of faith. That's what we've been doing. And I'm glad you tuned in today. So our topic for today, 3 reasons why so many couples struggle with communication, right? Pretty practical. When it comes to relationships, communication is like oxygen. It's essential for survival. Yet, so many couples, right? So many of us find themselves gasping for breath in this area. So why is that? Well, today we're going to investigate 3 common reasons why communication can be challenging. Here they are: pride, fear, and lack of vulnerability. Now, I understand these aren't the only 3 reasons, but there's certainly 3 that are pretty common. So let's start with pride. Pride's that sneaky little monster, right? That likes to rear its head in relationships. And here's what it does. It tells us we're right and our partner is wrong. It convinces us that admitting fault is a sign of weakness. But what's the Bible have to say about pride? Well, actually a lot. But our verse today, I think it's helpful. It comes from Proverbs 13:10. Listen to it in 2 different translations. First is the Christian Standard Bible, the CSB, and that's the one I like to read from. It says this way: arrogance leads to nothing but strife, but wisdom is gained by those who take advice. So now from the New Living Translation, or the NLT. Pride leads to conflict. Those who take advice are wise. Pretty straightforward, right? God says, slow down. Don't always assume you're right. And then listen to advice. So let's make this practical. What can we do to combat pride in our relationship, in our communication? Number 1, practice humility, right? Instead of pride, practice humility. Instead of always needing to be right, strive to understand your partner's perspective. Listen actively. That's an important word. Listen actively and acknowledge when you've made a mistake. So that means listening to understand, not listening to respond. I'll say again for clarity. Listen to understand, not to respond. If you listen only to respond, you're not going to understand, right? You're just putting your argument together, and then round and round we go with a fight, with a lack of understanding. So listen to understand. Number 2, way to combat pride: seek wise counsel, like Proverbs said. Don't be afraid to seek outside guidance in trusted mentors or counselors if there's communication barriers. Because pride really can build walls to solutions, right? But if you seek outside advice, that demonstrates humility and it demonstrates a willingness to grow. So, pride. Let's move on to the second reason couples struggle with communication: fear. Now, fear can pop up for a lot of reasons. It can come from our past, the relationship itself that we're in, the lack of humility, for example, from one partner. It's a fear of rejection, the fear of being misunderstood, or the fear of facing an uncomfortable truth or truths. Fear can be paralyzing. It can prevent us from speaking up or genuinely listening to our partner. But the Bible does offer a different perspective on fear. Because for followers of Christ, here's what we're promised. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, we're reminded this: God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. So, how can we overcome fear in our communication? Number 1, cultivate trust. You want to foster an environment where you and your partner feel safe expressing yourselves honestly without fear of judgment or rejection. Trust really is the antidote to fear. But that takes work, right? I mean, building trust is hard. And if one partner feels the relationship doesn't have it, it's going to take a lot of work, but you can do it. One way is to remember what we talked about with pride. You must actively listen and understand one another. But you can also say you're sorry more often. You can stop with the personal attacks. You can keep your word. So talk about it as a couple and see how you can build trust, right? Like do the work. Number 2, a way to combat fear in your relationship. Practice courage. Now that sounds kind of funny, right? Like, how do you practice courage? Well, what is courage? Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. John Wayne said, courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. So take small steps toward vulnerability in your communication, knowing that God's strength is with you every step of the way. Because if you're going to practice courage, you have to act on the decision to make things better. That takes courage, right? If you're going to fix it, you have to actually do something about it. That does take courage. So finally, let's talk about the third reason couples struggle with communication. And I actually just mentioned it, building vulnerability into a relationship, right? It's a lack of vulnerability. That's a big barrier to good communication. Because vulnerability is the key to deepening the intimacy in a relationship. But it's often the hardest to embrace because pride and fear are usually intermingled there, right? So vulnerability, though, requires us to let down our guard, to expose our weaknesses and our insecurities. I mean, when you do that with somebody, that deepens your relationship big time. Vulnerability is where genuine connection begins, right? That really is it. So our verse for this one to think about comes from Ephesians in the New Testament, written by the Apostle Paul, chapter 4, verse 2. He says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. That takes vulnerability to do that. So, practically speaking, how can we become more vulnerable in our communication? Number 1, practice authenticity. In other words, be honest. Be transparent with your partner about your thoughts, your feelings, your struggles. Because authenticity breeds intimacy, and it's going to foster deeper connection. And that's going to build trust and break down pride. Number two, way to practice vulnerability in your relationship. Create a safe space. Now, I know that seems like pretty touchy-feely to some. It's like, what do you mean a safe space? Well, let me clarify. I don't mean a safe space where no one's feelings get hurt. And I say that cautiously, but in an environment where nobody's feelings can get hurt, we can't be honest with each other if that's what we're doing. Here's what I mean by safe space. Encourage open communication by demonstrating empathy, understanding, and a willingness to listen without judgment or, this is key, personal attacks. Remember, like Jesus, if he's our model, we should embody truth and grace, right? It can't just be all truth because that's just harsh, right? And not loving at all. And then all grace is just like, oh, whatever, I'm going to let you do whatever, and I don't want to hurt your feelings. It's like, and that's not healthy. No growth comes from really either end of that spectrum. We have to embody both, just like Jesus did. And that's in John chapter 1, I think verse 17. When both partners in a relationship feel accepted and valued, vulnerability becomes less daunting. It's not such a big mountain. Again, this is hard work though, but it is possible. You both have to work on it, but it is possible. If you seek God together in these very interconnected issues that we've talked about today, you're going to see him begin to do work. Even if at first it's just in one of you, because sometimes that's what it is. And again, that's what makes it hard. It's like, I'm doing all this work, and it's the consistency to stick with this and build this into your relationships is tough, because sometimes it is just one person that has to lead the way. And that, again, like I said earlier, that takes courage. But it does, in the end, take both partners to break down the barriers to good communication. So, in summary, number 1, pride leads to conflict. Now, to combat that, we're going to practice humility And we're going to seek wise counsel. That's what we saw. Proverbs 13:10. Great advice there. Number 2, fear stifles communication. So what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to cultivate trust, and you're going to have to practice courage, just like we talked about from 2 Timothy 1:7. And then the third thing, lack of vulnerability is going to hinder your intimacy. So you need to practice authenticity and create a safe space. That's Ephesians 4:2, right? It takes work to do that kind of stuff. But remember, communication is not just about talking. It's about understanding. It's about connecting. And it's about growing together. We can cultivate healthier, more fulfilling relationships by addressing these common barriers. And we're going to do that with humility. We're going to do it with courage. We're going to do it with authenticity, right? Just remember, it can be done. You can have good communication. So I hope you found this conversation today helpful and practical. And if you did, help us out by liking it, by sharing it, gets the word out there for us. So until next time, may your communication be filled with truth and grace. Take care and God bless you.